The bitter January wind whipped through the streets of New York City as 16-year-old Mika Tanaka clutched her coat tighter around her small frame. Fresh off a 14-hour flight from Tokyo, she squinted up at the towering buildings that seemed to touch the gray winter sky. Everything was bigger here, louder somehow. Her father, walking beside her with their luggage, gave her a gentle nudge. "We're almost at the hotel, Mika, just 2 more blocks." Mika nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. In her backpack, carefully wrapped in soft cloth, were the sheet music pieces she had practiced for thousands of hours. Tomorrow would be the first day of the International Young Pianist Competition, the most prestigious contest for pianists under 18. Winners often went on to perform at Carnegie Hall and launch international careers. The hotel room was warm but plain. Mika immediately went to the window, staring out at the unfamiliar city where her dream might either soar or crash. Back home in their modest apartment in Tokyo, she had a small upright piano that had belonged to her grandmother. It was out of tune in places, but Mika knew every key, every sound it made. She had never played on a concert grand piano until 6 months ago, when her teacher arranged special practice sessions at a local music school. "You should rest," her father said, setting down their suitcases. Tomorrow is a big day, but rest wouldn't come. After her father fell asleep, Mika sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, fingers moving silently through the air, playing invisible keys. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, her competition piece, ran through her mind note by note. She had chosen it because it spoke to her soul, though her teacher had warned it might be too ambitious. Morning came too quickly. The competition was being held at a famous music school with history stretching back over 100 years. Walking through its doors, Mika felt like an imposter. The other young pianists moved with confidence, laughing and talking in English that flowed too fast for her to catch more than a few words. Many seemed to know each other from previous competitions or summer programs. A tall woman with a clipboard directed Mika to a registration table. "Name?" she asked briskly. "Tanaka Mika," she replied, then quickly corrected herself, remembering Western order. "I mean Mika Tanaka." The woman checked a list. "You're from Tokyo, correct? This is your first international competition." Mika nodded, feeling smaller by the second. "Preliminary evaluations begin at 10. You'll be in Group C, room 305. The woman handed her a badge and a folder. "Good luck." The practice rooms were down a long hallway. Mika found an empty one and slipped inside, grateful for a moment alone. The room held a baby grand piano, not the full concert grand she would perform on, but still nicer than anything she had regular access to in Tokyo. She set her music on the stand, took a deep breath, and began to play. For 10 minutes, the world fell away. There was only Chopin, only the music flowing from her fingers. Then a sharp knock on the door broke the spell. "Time's up," called a voice. "Others need to practice too." Gathering her things, Mika headed upstairs to room 305. About 20 other contestants were already there, along with the 5 judges seated at a long table. 3 men, 2 women, all with serious expressions and notepads. The head judge, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood to address the group. "Welcome to the preliminary round of the 43rd International Young Pianists Competition," he announced. "I'm Dr. Richard Bennett, and these are my colleagues from the American Classical Institute." He introduced the other judges, all renowned pianists, or music professors from prestigious American conservatories. "Today is not a performance," Dr. Bennett continued. "It's an evaluation. We'll ask each of you to play portions of your competition piece, and we may interrupt to ask questions or request specific sections. This helps us assess not just your technical ability, but your musical understanding." Mika's stomach tightened. Her English was good enough for basic conversation, but discussing musical theory? She wasn't sure she had the vocabulary. One by one, contestants were called to the piano. Many played with remarkable skill. They were all among the best young pianists in their countries. The judges asked questions about interpretative choices, tempo, and emotional expression. Most of the young musicians answered confidently, sometimes even challenging the judges' suggestions. When a boy from Germany finished his evaluation, Dr. Bennett nodded approvingly. "Excellent control of the Beethoven. Your understanding of the classical form is impressive for someone your age." Another judge added, "You've clearly been well trained. I can hear the European tradition in your playing. The boy smiled, soaking in the praise. Mika Tanaka, Dr. Bennett called next, consulting his list. Heart-pounding, Mika walked to the piano. The bench was adjusted too low for her, and she fumbled with the mechanism to raise it. Already she felt flustered. "Your piece?" Dr. Bennett asked. "Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Opus 23, she answered, her accent thickening with nervousness. A female judge raised her eyebrows. Ambitious choice. "Let's hear the opening." Mika placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of the ballade were meant to be mysterious, questioning. She tried to put all her feeling into them, the way her teacher had taught her. "Stop there," Dr. Bennett said after less than a minute. "Your technique is clean, but I'm not feeling the narrative tension Chopin intended. This piece tells a story. Do you understand what that story is?" Mika blinked, trying to form words. "Yes, it is. Like a poem." Chopin was inspired by Polish poetry. "Not just any poetry," another judge cut in. "Adam Mickiewicz's nationalistic ballads. They're supposed to be conflict drama. Your playing is too contained," Dr. Bennett nodded. "Try the section beginning at measure 68, where the main theme develops." Mika flipped through her music, found the spot, and began again. This time she tried to play with more expression, more passion. But after 30 seconds, the youngest judge, a woman with short dark hair, waved her hand. "There's something mechanical about your interpretation," she said. "It's technically accurate, but where's the soul? Where's the understanding?" A balding judge leaned over to whisper something to Dr. Bennett, who nodded slightly. Mika caught the words Asian approach and felt her cheeks burn. Dr. Bennett cleared his throat. "Ms. Tanaka, there's a tradition of Western classical music that perhaps is difficult to fully grasp without cultural immersion. Chopin especially requires a certain emotional vocabulary." The female judge who had spoken earlier seemed uncomfortable with this direction. "What Dr. Bennett means is that each pianist brings their own life experience to a piece. Tell us, what does this ballade mean to you personally?" Mika's mind raced. In Japanese, she could have explained how the music reminded her of standing by the ocean during a storm, watching waves crash against rocks, powerful yet beautiful. But in English, under pressure, with 5 pairs of critical eyes watching her, it is beautiful music. Very emotional, she managed. "I practice many hours to play correctly." The judges exchanged glances. One scribbled something on his notepad and slid it to Dr. Bennett, who frowned slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Tanaka," he said, his tone suggesting the evaluation was over. "Please work on bringing more personal interpretation to the piece before the first round tomorrow." As Mika returned to her seat, she heard a whispered comment from one judge to another. "Technical skill, sure, but no real understanding. Typical." The rest of the evaluations passed in a blur.
Mika sat still, hands folded in her lap, fighting back tears.
She had traveled across the world for this opportunity, practiced until her fingers ached, and in less than 5 minutes, these judges had dismissed her. Not because she played poorly, but because they didn't believe someone like her could understand their music. When the session ended, the other contestants filed out, some in groups, chatting excitedly about dinner plans. Mika waited until everyone had left before gathering her things. As she was about to leave, the female judge who had asked about her personal connection to the music approached. "Don't be discouraged," she said kindly. "First international competitions are always intimidating." Mika nodded politely. "Thank you. I will practice more tonight." The judge seemed about to say something else, but just smiled sadly instead. "Good luck tomorrow." Outside the building, the winter sun was already setting. Mika found her father waiting on a bench, his face hopeful. She couldn't bring herself to tell him how badly it had gone, how the judges had mocked her understanding while praising the Western contestants. "How was it?" he asked. Mika forced a smile. "I know what I need to work on before tomorrow." As they walked back to the hotel, snowflakes began to fall on the bustling city streets. Tomorrow she would have to play for those same judges again, this time in a formal performance. The thought made her stomach knot with anxiety. But underneath the fear, something else was brewing, a quiet determination. She would show them that music belonged to everyone, that her understanding ran deeper than words could express. Tonight, she would practice. And tomorrow, when she touched those piano keys again, she would make them listen. That night, sleep refused to come for Mika. The hotel room was too warm, the sounds of the city too unfamiliar. but mostly the judge's words kept replaying in her mind. Mechanical. Lacks soul. Typical. Each remembered comment stung like a fresh wound. Her father snored softly in the bed next to hers. He had worked extra shifts at his office job for months to afford this trip. When Mika was accepted to the competition, neighbors in their apartment building had pooled money to help with travel expenses. Her piano teacher had waived fees for additional lessons. Everyone believed in her. Everyone except the people who mattered most here. At 3 a.m, Mika slipped out of bed and sat by the window. Snow was falling heavily now, coating the New York streets in white. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Back home in Tokyo, her bedroom window faced a small garden where an old plum tree bloomed each spring. She would practice piano with that window open, the gentle scent of blossoms drifting in. Those memories seemed a world away from this concrete city where she felt so out of place. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was her friend Yuki, who was watching the competition live stream from Tokyo despite the time difference. Just saw the preliminary evaluations online, the message read. Don't listen to those judges. They looked like they decided before you even played. Mika typed back, they think I don't understand the music because I'm Japanese. Yuki's reply came quickly. Then make them understand. Play so well they have to listen. Easy to say, harder to do. But as Mika watched the snow fall, a strange calm settled over her. What if she stopped trying to please these judges? What if she simply played the way the music made her feel? Morning came with weak winter sunlight. Mika's father insisted they eat a proper breakfast at a small diner near the hotel. She pushed eggs around her plate while he studied the competition schedule. You perform at 1:15 today, he said, right after lunch break. Good timing. Mika nodded, not trusting her voice. Her father reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Your mother would be so proud, he said softly. She always said you had her hands. Mika's mother had died when she was 7. The memories were fading, but Mika still remembered her playing the old upright piano, showing Mika where to place her small fingers on the keys. Those early lessons were wrapped in love, not judgment. I wish she was here, Mika whispered. Her father smiled sadly. She is in your music. They arrived at the competition venue early. Today's performances would take place in the school's main concert hall, a beautiful room with wood-paneled walls and plush red seats that could hold 300 people. Already it was half full with other contestants, teachers, parents, and classical music enthusiasts. Backstage, Mika found a quiet corner to warm up her fingers with silent exercises. Other young pianists paced nervously or whispered to their teachers. A boy from Russia was doing push-ups to calm his nerves. A girl from Italy was carefully painting her nails a deep red. An American contestant who had received glowing comments yesterday was telling a story to a small group. So then Bennett says to me, your list reminds me of my days studying in Budapest. Can you believe it? The others laughed appreciatively. The same tall woman with the clipboard from yesterday appeared. Contestants for the first half, please line up in performance order. Mika found her place in line. She would be the 8th performer, right after a boy from Canada and before a girl from Spain. The boy, tall with reddish-brown hair, turned and gave her a friendly nod. Nervous? He asked. Yes, Mika admitted. He grinned. Me too. I think I'm going to throw up. Despite everything, Mika found herself smiling back. It was oddly comforting to know everyone felt the same butterflies regardless of where they came from. The concert hall fell silent as Dr. Bennett took the stage. He welcomed the audience, explained the competition format, and introduced the judges, the same panel from yesterday, now dressed more formally and seated in the front row. Each contestant will perform their selected piece in its entirety, Dr. Bennett explained. They will be evaluated on technical skill, artistic interpretation, stage presence, and overall musicality. The top 12 performers will advance to tomorrow's semifinal round. The performances began. Even from backstage, Mika could hear the powerful playing of the first contestant, a Rachmaninoff concerto that thundered through the hall. The audience applauded enthusiastically when he finished. One by one, the young pianists took their turns. Some played with fiery passion, others with delicate precision. All were talented. They wouldn't be here otherwise. The boy from Canada who had spoken to Mika performed a Mozart sonata with playful elegance that made the difficult piece seem effortless. Then it was Mika's turn. Next, from Tokyo, Japan, Mika Tanaka performing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Opus 23, announced the host. Walking onto the stage felt like moving through water. The lights were bright, the audience a blur of faces. Only the judges were clearly visible in the front row, Dr. Bennett's silver hair catching the light. The youngest female judge offered a small, encouraging smile, but the others watched with neutral expressions. Mika bowed slightly, then sat at the gleaming black concert grand piano. This was nothing like her practice piano at home, nothing like even the best piano she had played in Japan. This instrument was worth more than her father's yearly salary, perfectly tuned and maintained. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The hall was so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the heating system. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. What if she forgot the notes? What if her fingers slipped? What if they were right and she really didn't understand this music? Then she remembered her father's words from breakfast. Her mother was in her music. And suddenly, instead of playing for these judges who had already decided she wasn't good enough, Mika decided to play for her mother. For the woman who had first placed her hands on piano keys and opened up a world of sound and feeling. The opening notes of the ballade hung in the air, questioning, uncertain like the first drops of rain before a storm. Mika let the melody breathe, taking slightly more time than was traditional. This wasn't about following rules anymore. This was about telling a story. As the piece progressed, Mika felt something strange happening. The nervousness was melting away, replaced by a deep focus. Her fingers found the keys without conscious thought. The music flowed through her, each note connecting to the next with inevitable rightness. When she reached the section that Dr. Bennett had criticized yesterday, she didn't try to play it the way he wanted. Instead, she let herself feel the tension Chopin had written into the harmony, the struggle between light and dark themes. Her small body swayed slightly as the dynamics built from piano to forte. The main theme returned and Mika poured all her longing for home, all her determination to prove herself, into the melody. In her mind, cherry blossoms fell over a stormy sea. This wasn't Polish poetry. This was her own story. As the piece raced toward its dramatic conclusion, Mika felt tears pricking behind her eyes, but her hands remained steady. The final chords resonated through the hall, powerful and definitive. Then silence. For a terrible moment, Mika thought she had failed completely. But then came the applause, first a few hesitant claps, then growing, spreading through the audience like ripples in water. She rose, legs shaking, and bowed. As she straightened, her eyes met Dr. Bennett's. The head judge's expression was unreadable, but he was leaning forward in his seat, his notebook forgotten in his lap. Next to him, the youngest judge was openly wiping tears from her eyes. Backstage, the Canadian boy gave her a thumbs up. "That was amazing," he whispered. "You made my Mozart sound like a nursery rhyme." Mika thanked him, still feeling oddly disconnected, as if part of her remained on stage with the music. More contestants performed, but she barely heard them. Only when the last pianist finished did she fully return to reality. Her father found her in the lobby during the judges' deliberation break. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Mika said honestly. "I played differently than I practiced." "You played beautifully," said a voice behind them. It was the youngest judge, the woman who had shown her kindness yesterday. "I'm not supposed to talk to contestants between rounds, but I wanted to say your Chopin was special." Before Mika could respond, the woman hurried away to rejoin the other judges. Her father squeezed Mika's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. An hour later, the results were posted on a large board in the main hallway. Contestants crowded around, some emerging with smiles, others with dejected expressions. Mika hung back, afraid to look. The Canadian boy pushed through the crowd, grinning. "We both made it." "You're in fourth place." "Fourth place." Out of 32 contestants, she had ranked fourth. High enough to advance easily to the semifinals. Mika felt dizzy with relief. As the crowd thinned, she finally approached the board to see for herself. There was her name, and next to it, a comment from the judges. Exceptional emotional depth and unique interpretative voice. Technical skills serving the music rather than showcasing themselves. Mika read the words twice to be sure she understood correctly. Then she noticed something else. A small note at the bottom of the page announcing a special masterclass that evening for select contestants, led by Dr. Bennett himself. Her name was on that list too. Perhaps they were finally ready to listen, and Mika, after today, was finally ready to be heard. The special masterclass was held in a smaller recital hall, with just 8 selected contestants invited to attend. Mika arrived early, finding the room empty except for a stern-looking older woman tuning the grand piano. She took a seat in the back row, hoping to observe quietly before drawing any attention to herself. Gradually, the other chosen pianists filtered in. The Canadian boy spotted her and dropped into the seat beside her. "I'm Alex," he said, sticking out his hand. "I don't think we properly introduced ourselves earlier." "Mika," she replied, shaking his hand. "Your Mozart was very beautiful." He grinned. "Thanks, but I heard at least 3 mistakes I made. Your Chopin, though? Flawless." Before Mika could respond, the door swung open and Dr. Bennett strode in, followed by 2 of the other judges. The room immediately fell silent. "Good evening, select few," Dr. Bennett said, his voice echoing slightly in the small hall. "You've been chosen for this masterclass because each of you demonstrated something special today, something worth developing further." He placed his briefcase on a small table and removed a stack of sheet music. "Tomorrow's semifinal will require something different from each of you. Today you played pieces you've practiced for months. Tomorrow you'll need to show us your ability to adapt, to collaborate, to find music in unfamiliar territory." The students exchanged nervous glances. This hadn't been mentioned in the competition guidelines. "Each of you will perform a chamber piece with one of our resident musicians," Dr. Bennett continued. "You'll have tonight to prepare. The pieces are challenging but not impossible for musicians of your caliber." One by one, he called contestants forward to receive their assigned music. When he called Mika's name, she walked to the front on shaky legs. "Ms. Tanaka," he said, handing her a score. "Your performance today was unexpected." Mika couldn't tell if this was a compliment or criticism. "Thank you, sir," she said cautiously. "You'll be working with our cellist on the Rachmaninoff Sonata in G minor," Dr. Bennett said. "First movement only, thankfully for you. It's a dialogue between equals. The piano doesn't merely accompany the cello, nor does the cello merely sing over the piano." Mika looked down at the music. She had never played this piece before, had never even heard it. The notes swam before her eyes, complex rhythms, dense chords, and constant tempo changes. How was she supposed to learn this overnight? "You'll have 2 hours now to work with Ms. Chen," Dr. Bennett continued, gesturing to a young woman entering with a cello case. "Use them wisely." The next 2 hours were among the most intense of Mika's life. Grace Chen, the cellist, was a recent graduate of a famous conservatory and a demanding partner. They worked in a small practice room running through the movement section by section. No, Grace said after their 3rd attempt at the opening. "You're playing like you're afraid of the music. Rachmaninoff isn't Chopin. He demands power. Passion." Mika tried again, pressing the keys with more force, but Grace shook her head. "It's not about hitting harder. It's about intention. What is the music saying here? What story are we telling?" Mika stared at the notes, wishing they would speak to her the way Chopin did. "I don't know this piece," she admitted. "I never heard it before." Grace sighed, then surprised Mika by smiling. "Honestly, that might be an advantage. You don't have preconceptions." She set down her bow. "Forget the notes for a minute. Rachmaninoff wrote this when he was in love but facing criticism of his work. There's joy here but also defiance." Something clicked for Mika. Joy mixed with defiance. Wasn't that exactly what she had felt during her performance today? "Let's try again," she said. This time, instead of just reading the notes, Mika tried to feel the emotion behind them. The opening chords were like questions, the melody that followed like someone finding their voice. When Grace's cello entered with its soulful line, Mika responded not by competing, but by supporting, then challenging, then dancing alongside. By the end of their practice session, they hadn't perfected the piece, but they had found its heart. Grace seemed pleased. "You're a fast learner," she said, packing up her cello. "Most pianists take weeks to find the balance in this sonata. Will you play with me tomorrow? Mika asked. Grace nodded. All the resident musicians will be performing with their assigned contestants. Get some rest tonight and review the score if you can. I'll see you backstage tomorrow. When Mika left the practice room, she was surprised to find her father waiting in the hallway. How did it go? He asked. Hard, Mika admitted. But interesting. I have to learn a new piece for tomorrow. They walked back to their hotel through light snow. Mika's father wanted to find somewhere nice for dinner to celebrate her advancing to the semifinals, but Mika insisted on room service so she could study the score while eating. In their room, she spread the music across her bed and began to work through it mentally, her fingers moving in silent practice above the pages. Her father watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. You should sleep, he said after she had been at it for 3 hours. Soon, she promised, not looking up. When her father's gentle snores filled the room, Mika took her phone and headphones from her bag. She found a recording of the Rachmaninoff Sonata online and listened intently, following along with the score. The piece was even more complex than she had initially thought. But now that she understood its emotional core, the technical challenges seemed less intimidating. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke with a start at 5 a.m., her headphones tangled around her neck and the score wrinkled beneath her. Moving quietly to avoid waking her father, she gathered the music and sat by the window. In the pre-dawn darkness, the city below was quieter than usual, a gentle blanket of fresh snow muffling the sounds. Mika closed her eyes and visualized the entire piece, her fingers moving through each passage. By the time the sun rose, she felt as ready as she could be. The semi-finals were held in the same concert hall as yesterday, but the stage had been rearranged to accommodate the chamber music performances. A larger audience had gathered. Word had spread about some of the standout performances from the first round. Backstage was chaotic. The resident musicians were warming up alongside nervous contestants. Instrument cases lay open, scores were spread across every surface, and a string quartet was tuning in one corner. Grace found Mika and led her to a quiet spot. How are you feeling? Nervous, Mika admitted. But I think I understand the piece better now. Grace nodded approvingly. Remember, we're telling a story together. Just listen and respond. They were scheduled to perform fourth. Mika watched the first 3 pairs from the wings, noting how differently each pianist approached the collaborative aspect. One seemed to be competing with his violinist partner. Another was too timid and got lost beneath the brass accompaniment. Then it was their turn. The stage lights seemed even brighter than yesterday. Dr. Bennett and the other judges sat with their notepads, faces serious and expectant. Mika spotted her father in the audience, sitting straighter than those around him, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Grace positioned her cello as Mika adjusted the piano bench. They exchanged a nod, and Mika began the opening chords, those questioning, searching notes that now made sense to her. When Grace's cello entered, rich and soulful, Mika felt a thrill of connection. This wasn't a solo performance anymore. This was a conversation. For 9 minutes, they spoke through their instruments. There were moments when Mika's fingers stumbled over unfamiliar patterns, but each time she found her way back, guided by the emotional map she had created in her mind. The music rose and fell, surged and retreated, the piano and cello trading melodies and harmonies like old friends sharing secrets. When they reached the final climactic passage, Mika felt something she had never experienced before, a complete unity with another musician, as if they were breathing together, thinking together. The final notes rang out, clear and definitive, and then silence fell. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As Mika stood to bow, she caught Dr. Bennett's eye. The head judge was writing rapidly in his notebook, but there was a new expression. On his face, something like surprise mixed with respect. Grace squeezed Mika's shoulder as they left the stage. That was special, she whispered. Really special. The remaining contestants performed, but Mika barely heard them. She was still living in the world she and Grace had created together, a world where music transcended language and culture. When all performances were complete, The contestants were asked to return to the stage. Dr. Bennett stood before them, holding a single sheet of paper. "The judges have made their decision," he announced. "The following 6 contestants will advance to tomorrow's final round." Mika held her breath as he read the names. The Canadian boy Alex was called first, then a girl from Germany. The third name was a boy from Russia. Fourth, Mika Tanaka, Japan. A rush of relief flooded through her. She had made it to the finals. 2 more names were called, a boy from Italy and a girl from South Korea, and then Dr. Bennett set down his paper. "Congratulations to our finalists," he said. "For tomorrow's final round, each of you will perform your original solo piece again, followed by a piece of your choosing that represents your cultural heritage." Mika's mind raced. A piece that represented her cultural heritage? She had prepared only the Chopin. "You have until tomorrow morning to select and prepare your second piece," Dr. Bennett continued. "Use your time wisely." As the contestants dispersed, Mika felt a tap on her shoulder. It was the youngest judge, the one who had spoken to her after yesterday's performance. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "Your Rachmaninoff was wonderful, especially on such short notice." "Thank you," Mika replied, then hesitated. "May I ask?" "For the heritage piece tomorrow." The judge smiled. "The committee hoped you might play something Japanese. Dr. Bennett was particularly interested after your Chopin interpretation showed such a unique voice." Dr. Bennett, interested in her cultural perspective. The same man who had dismissed her understanding just 2 days ago. "I didn't bring any Japanese music with me," Mika admitted. "The music library here has an excellent collection," the judge offered. "I'd be happy to help you look." As they walked toward the library, Mika felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride at having advanced, anxiety about the new challenge, but underneath it all, a growing confidence. The judges were listening now. Tomorrow, she would make sure they heard something they would never forget. The music library at the school was a vast room with high ceilings and walls lined with thousands of scores. The kind judge, who introduced herself as Professor Laura Wilson, led Mika through rows of shelves to a section dedicated to Asian composers. "We have quite a collection of Japanese piano music," Professor Wilson said, pulling out several volumes. Traditional and contemporary. Mika ran her fingers along the spines of the books, reading names both familiar and unknown. She had studied some Japanese compositions back home, but had focused primarily on Western classical music for competitions. "What kind of piece were you thinking of?" Professor Wilson asked. Mika considered the question carefully. "Something that shows who I am. Not just Japanese, but me." They spent an hour browsing through possibilities. Some pieces were too simple, others too experimental for a competition setting. Then Mika found a composition by Michio Miyagi, originally written for koto but arranged for piano. "The Sea in Spring," she read aloud, flipping through the pages. The notation looked deceptively simple, but the emotional landscape it created was complex and deeply familiar. "Miyagi was blind from age 8, Professor Wilson commented. "He composed by feeling rather than seeing music." Something resonated within Mika. Wasn't that what she had done yesterday with the Chopin? Playing from feeling rather than just reading notes. "This one," she said decisively. "I'll play this." Professor Wilson seemed pleased with her choice. "It's beautiful and not performed often in Western settings. The contrast with your Chopin will be striking." Mika borrowed the score and found an empty practice room where she could work. The piece wasn't technically difficult compared to Chopin, but it required a different touch entirely. A lightness, a different sense of time and space. The harmonies were built on pentatonic scales that created a distinctly Japanese sound world. As she practiced, Mika realized something important. For years, she had been trying to play Western music the right way, studying recordings of famous pianists and attempting to imitate their interpretations. But with this piece, there was no right way, at least not in this competition. She could bring her own understanding to it, could play it as someone who had grown up with both Western and Japanese musical traditions. Hours passed as she worked through the composition, exploring different approaches. Eventually, a knock at the door interrupted her concentration. It was her father, looking concerned. "It's nearly midnight," he said. "The building is closing." Mika gathered her things, surprised at how quickly time had flown. On their walk back to the hotel, she told her father about the piece she had chosen. Miyagi? He said, surprised. Your mother used to play his music on the koto before you were born. Mika stopped walking. She did? You never told me that. Her father smiled sadly. There are many things I haven't told you about her. Perhaps it's time I did. That night, as Mika practiced silently on the hotel bed with the score in front of her, her father told stories about her mother, how she had studied traditional Japanese music before switching to Western classical piano, how she had dreams of performing internationally but had set them aside when she got married. She would say music is music, her father recalled. The instruments and traditions may differ, but what matters is the heart behind the playing. Mika thought about her mother's hands on the keys, the same hands she had inherited. Do you think she would be proud of how I played today? Without a doubt, her father said, but most proud of how you found your own voice. Morning came too quickly. Mika had barely slept, her mind filled with music and memories. She arrived at the competition venue early to get more practice time with the Miyagi piece. To her surprise, she found Alex, the Canadian boy, already there, working on what sounded like a folk tune. French-Canadian fiddle music, he explained when he saw her. My grandfather used to play it, Mika smiled. For your heritage piece? He nodded. What about you? Miyagi, Japanese composer who wrote for traditional instruments. Cool, Alex said, then added more seriously. Good luck today. Not that you need it after yesterday. The final round would take place that afternoon, with each contestant performing both their original piece and their heritage selection. The panel of judges had expanded to include guest experts in different musical traditions, a thoughtful addition that Mika appreciated. As the hours ticked by, Mika alternated between practicing both pieces and simply sitting quietly, gathering her focus. By the time contestants were called to prepare, she felt strangely calm, clearer than she had been at any point in the competition. The performance order was determined by random draw. Mika would perform last, a position both advantageous and nerve-wracking. She would have to wait through 5 other performances before taking the stage. The final round began with Alex playing his Mozart, followed by a lively arrangement of Quebec folk tunes. The audience responded enthusiastically to the contrast between the refined classical piece and the foot-tapping rhythms of his heritage selection. One by one, the other finalists performed. The girl from Germany paired Beethoven with a moody Brahms intermezzo. The Russian contestant followed Tchaikovsky with an intense Prokofiev sonata. The Italian boy complemented his Scarlatti with a romantic Puccini transcription. The Korean girl contrasted Debussy with a contemporary Korean composition that used extended piano techniques. Throughout these performances, Mika watched Dr. Bennett. The head judge seemed genuinely engaged with each heritage piece, leaning forward with interest even when the music diverged dramatically from classical traditions. This was a different man from the one who had dismissed her understanding just 3 days ago. Finally, it was Mika's turn. As she walked onto the stage, she realized how far she had come from that first terrifying evaluation. The hall was completely full now, with people standing at the back. She could see her father sitting straight-backed in the 10th row, hands clasped in his lap. She bowed and took her place at the piano. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, centering herself in silence before beginning the Chopin. The opening notes of the ballade felt like greeting an old friend. But this performance was different from her first round. Now the questioning phrases at the beginning had answers. The tension had purpose. The journey had direction. Mika played with both the technical precision she had always possessed and the emotional freedom she had discovered during this competition. When the final chords of the Chopin resonated through the hall, the audience erupted in applause. Mika allowed herself a small smile before turning to acknowledge them with a bow. As the applause died down, she remained seated at the piano. There would be no break between her pieces. With a deep breath, she let go of Chopin's world and entered Miyagi's. The Sea in Spring began with a simple melody that evoked waves lapping gently against a shore. The harmonies were sparse but rich with meaning, creating space for imagination. As Mika played, she thought of her mother's hands on the koto strings, of cherry blossoms falling into water, of the meeting point between 2 musical traditions that had shaped her life. The middle section of the piece grew more complex, with rippling patterns suggesting wind across water. Mika let her touch become lighter, creating sounds that were almost transparent. This wasn't about power or virtuosity, it was about subtlety, about the spaces between notes being as important as the notes themselves. The final section returned to the opening theme, but transformed as if seen through new eyes. Mika felt tears threatening as she played the concluding measures, but her hands remained steady. The last note hung in the air like a question without an answer. For several seconds, no one moved or made a sound. Then Dr. Bennett himself began to applaud, rising to his feet. The rest of the audience followed, erupting in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the hall. Mika stood and bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the response. When she looked up, she saw that many people had tears in their eyes, including Professor Wilson and, to her shock, Dr. Bennett himself. Backstage was a blur of congratulations from other contestants and musicians. Alex gave her a high five, saying, "They're going to rename the competition after you." The finalists were soon called back to the stage for the announcement of results. Mika stood between the Korean girl and the Russian boy, heart pounding as Dr. Bennett approached the microphone. "Before I announce the winners," he said, "I want to thank all our finalists for what has been one of the most enlightening competitions in my 30 years of judging. You have reminded us that music is a universal language with many dialects, all of them valuable." He looked directly at Mika as he said this, a small acknowledgement that made her stand a little taller. "Third place," Dr. Bennett announced, "goes to Alex Turner of Canada." Alex stepped forward to accept his bronze medal, beaming with pride. "Second place goes to Jinna Park of South Korea." The Korean girl accepted her silver medal with a graceful bow. Mika held her breath. Could she possibly have won? Or had she fallen out of the top 3 entirely? "And first place," Dr. Bennett said, pausing for effect, "with the highest score in the history of this competition, goes to Mika Tanaka of Japan." The audience erupted once more. Mika stood frozen in disbelief until the Russian boy gently pushed her forward. Dr. Bennett placed a gold medal around her neck and handed her an envelope containing, she would later learn, a scholarship to the school's summer program and an invitation to perform at Carnegie Hall. "Your playing," Dr. Bennett said quietly, for her ears only, "has taught me as much as 40 years of studying music. Thank you for that gift." As Mika turned to face the audience, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, she spotted her father in the crowd. He was openly weeping, hands pressed together as if in prayer. She touched the gold medal at her neck and then pressed her hand to her heart, a gesture meant for him alone. In that moment, standing on a stage thousands of miles from home, Mika realized she had found something beyond winning a competition. She had found her own voice, a voice that could speak through music across cultures, across prejudices, across oceans of misunderstanding, and the world was finally ready to listen. 3 years had passed since that life-changing night in New York. Mika Tanaka, now 19, stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, listening to the buzz of the audience beyond the curtain. Her fingers moved silently, rehearsing passages of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which she would perform with the New York Philharmonic in just minutes. So much had changed since she had won the International Young Pianists competition. That victory had opened doors she never imagined possible: a scholarship to the prestigious music school in New York, concert engagements across the United States and Europe, and now her second appearance at Carnegie Hall, this time as a featured soloist rather than a competition winner. 5 minutes. "Ms. Tanaka," the stage manager whispered, breaking her concentration. Mika nodded, taking a deep breath. Nearby, her father waited quietly. He had moved to New York when Mika began her studies, finding work as a translator to support her dream. The sacrifice wasn't lost on her. He had left behind everything familiar to help her succeed in this new world. "Nervous?" he asked, straightening his tie. He always dressed formally for her performances, no matter how small the venue. "A little," she admitted, "but the good kind of nervous." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Your mother would be so proud." The mention of her mother no longer brought only sadness. In these past years, Mika had connected with her mother's memory through music in ways that made her feel present, alive in every note Mika played. A tap on her shoulder made her turn. Dr. Bennett stood there, looking older but still formidable in his tuxedo. After the competition, he had become one of her most supportive mentors, recommending her to conductors and helping secure her scholarship. "Ready to dazzle us again?" he asked. his formal manner softened by genuine affection. "I'll try my best," Mika replied with a small bow, a habit she hadn't lost despite years in America. Dr. Bennett nodded toward the stage. "The Rachmaninoff suits you. You found the perfect balance between technical brilliance and emotional depth." Coming from him, this was high praise indeed. 3 years ago, he had questioned whether she could understand Western music at all. Now he regularly invited her to give masterclasses to his students on interpretative approaches. 2 minutes, called the stage manager. Dr. Bennett squeezed her shoulder gently. "Remember what we always say, music is music," Mika finished, smiling at their shared mantra. He nodded and slipped away to take his seat in the audience. Mika's father gave her one last encouraging look before doing the same. Alone now, Mika closed her eyes, centering herself. The journey from that nervous 16-year-old to the musician she had become hadn't been easy. There had been moments of homesickness so intense she'd considered returning to Japan. Times when the pressure of expectations nearly crushed her. Critics who still occasionally suggested her interpretations were exotic or unconventional, rather than simply recognizing her unique voice. But for every challenge, there had been breakthroughs, like the time she performed with a traditional Japanese ensemble, blending Western piano with koto and shakuhachi in a fusion that honored both traditions. Or the masterclass in Paris where she helped young pianists find their own authentic approaches to Debussy and Ravel. "Ms. Tanaka, you're on," the stage manager whispered. Mika opened her eyes and walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The applause was warm as she made her way to the gleaming black concert grand piano at the center of the stage. She bowed to the audience, then to the conductor, before taking her seat and adjusting the bench. As the orchestra began the dark, pulsing opening of the Rachmaninoff concerto, Mika took a deep breath, letting the music wash over her. When it came time for her entrance, those famous bell-like chords that rose from the depths of the piano, her hands moved with confidence and clarity. Playing with an orchestra was different from playing solo. It required both assertion and partnership, leading and following, speaking and listening. Mika had come to love this dynamic, finding in it a metaphor for her own cultural balancing act. The first movement flowed from brooding intensity to passionate outbursts, Mika's fingers dancing across the keys with both power and sensitivity. She knew this piece demanded everything from a pianist: technical brilliance, emotional range, physical stamina, and she gave herself to it completely. In the audience, she knew, sat not only her father and Dr. Bennett, but also many of the people who had been part of her journey. Alex, the Canadian pianist, now a friend and occasional duet partner. Professor Wilson, who had helped her find the Miyagi piece. Grace Chen, the cellist with whom she still performed chamber music. And in the third row sat an elderly Japanese man who had flown from Tokyo specifically for this concert. Her first piano teacher, who had recognized her talent when she was just 5 years old, playing on an out-of-tune upright piano in a small apartment. The second movement brought a change of mood, lyrical, tender, with a melody that seemed to speak of longing and hope. Mika thought of home as she played, of cherry blossoms and temple bells, of her mother's hands guiding hers on the keys. But she also thought of New York, of snowy nights and towering buildings, of new friends and hard-won victories. As the movement ended and the audience rustled in appreciation, Mika caught Dr. Bennett's eye in the front row. He gave a small nod of approval that meant more to her than 1,000 reviews. The third movement began with explosive energy, the orchestra and piano racing together through Rachmaninoff's dazzling rhythms. This was where technique was pushed to its limits, where years of practice paid off in moments of seemingly impossible virtuosity. Yet even here, in the most technically demanding passages, Mika found room for expression, for the personal voice she had discovered during that pivotal competition. Her playing was precise but never mechanical, brilliant but never merely showy. As the concerto built toward its triumphant conclusion, Mika felt a strange sense of coming full circle. 3 years ago, she had stood on a stage not far from here, playing to prove herself to judges who doubted her. Tonight, she played not to prove anything, but simply to share what she had found in the music: joy, sorrow, struggle, transcendence. The final chords resounded through the hall, piano and orchestra united in a moment of pure affirmation. As the last note faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. that magical moment when no one dared breathe or move. And then the audience erupted. Mika stood to take her bow, the applause washing over her like a wave. The conductor shook her hand, then gestured for the orchestra to stand. More applause, more bows. Flowers were brought to the stage, a bouquet of cherry blossoms mixed with roses, a thoughtful touch from someone who knew her story. But the most meaningful moment came after the performance. In the reception hall crowded with well-wishers, an older American couple approached her, the woman clutching a program to her chest. "We were there," the woman said, eyes bright with emotion, "at the competition 3 years ago. We were in the audience when the judge..." She trailed off, perhaps not wanting to recall the uncomfortable memory of prejudice. "When you played Chopin that day," her husband continued, "something changed in that room. People looked at each other differently. They listened differently." Mika smiled, touched by their words. "Music can do that," she said simply. "We've come to every one of your New York performances since then," the woman added. "But we wanted you to know, it wasn't just your career that began that day. Something began for all of us who were there. A different way of hearing." Later that night, after the reception had ended and the concert hall emptied, Mika found herself alone on the stage again. The cleaning crew had allowed her a few minutes of privacy when they saw her. Lingering by the door, she sat at the piano, the same magnificent instrument she had played hours earlier, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys without pressing them. In the dim light of the empty hall, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a little girl practicing on an old upright piano in Tokyo, to a nervous teenager facing a panel of skeptical judges, to the musician she was becoming, someone who could move between worlds, between traditions, creating something new in the spaces between. She thought of Dr. Bennett, who had transformed from a harsh critic to a supportive mentor, his own understanding expanded by their encounter, of her father, who had given up everything familiar to help her follow this path, of her mother, whose spirit seemed to guide her hands even now. Gently, Mika began to play, not Rachmaninoff or Chopin or any Western composer, but the Miyagi piece that had helped her win the competition. The sea in spring sounded different in this grand space, its simple beauty amplified by the perfect acoustics of Carnegie Hall. As the final notes faded into silence, Mika heard a sound from the back of the hall, soft applause. She turned to see a group of young music students who had been helping with the reception, now standing in the doorway, listening. "That was beautiful," one of them called out. "What was it?" "Something from home," Mika answered with a smile. "Would you like to learn it?" The students nodded eagerly, making their way down the aisle toward the stage. As Mika made room for them on the piano bench, she realized that this, sharing music across boundaries, opening ears and hearts to new sounds, was perhaps her most important work of all. The circle that had begun with judges mocking what they didn't understand was now expanding outward. Note by note, listener by listener, music that had once seemed foreign was becoming a bridge instead of a barrier. And Mika Tanaka, once an outsider, was helping to build that bridge, one piano key at a time.